The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Mfume. You are now recognized for 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you and Ranking Member, Mr. Rothman, and everyone who's gotten us to this point. This is a very important topic, obviously, and this particular hearing, I think, will help clear the air on some other things, and then hopefully put this in perspective in some other ways. More than anything else, the bottom line here is that this is Russian aggression. It's man-made Russian aggression. I think we can all agree that this is about Vladimir Putin. It is not about the Russian people per se. And after 22 years of pretty much dictatorial reign, Mr. Putin is looking on this as a way to seal his fate in history and to reverse the collapse of the Soviet Union. I'm a member of the Ukrainian caucus here in the Congress. I can tell you that we have, like all of you, watched this situation with a great deal of interest. Like some of you, I remember well, because I grew up in a Cold War America, the old Soviet Union. I remember reading in the weekly readers about something called the Iron Curtain, and had to be explained to me what was going on. And my parents and my uncles told me about the war they had just come out of. I grew up in the Korean era in the 1950s, and the Soviet Union's continued dominance that carried on throughout that. So I got a different perspective on this. And some people might say, well, why is this so important? I guess because I've seen what's happened when you don't treat things like this as important. I remember Hitler's aggression and what was known as war creep. And I can tell you what we're seeing here is war creep. It started just this century in 2008 with taking of Georgia. And, you know, we were silent, essentially. We've watched after that in 2014, as we all know, and it has been stated, the taking of Crimea. And when you look at the parallels that circle those two events, and you look at what's going on today, in my opinion, the similarities are striking, and they should bring about a great deal of concern. Troop movements, 2008, 2014, locations of weapons, the particular kind of propaganda that came out of Moscow, so much similar as today. So the Soviet Union is gone, but Mr. Putin believes that he has some divine authority to try to reinstate it. And in my opinion, when you look at the old Russian orbit, in which Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania were all a part of that, I just believe that Vladimir Putin is determined to try to take all of that back. And if he can do it in the Ukraine, what's gonna stop him? Now, there are certainly different answers about that, but I think if we think out the way he's thinking, nothing can stop it. I wanna thank the chair for referencing the classified briefing of the entire intelligence community that many of us sat in last week on. It was bipartisan, well, 2 weeks ago. Bipartisan. General Milley, Chair of the Joint Chiefs, addressed us, as did Secretary Austin, as did the Director of National Intelligence, Secretary of State Blinken, and others. And the information that came out of that briefing was concerning, to say the very, very least. So I want to just offer something here because, you know, we're having this hearing. It is an open hearing. And as the chairman said, many of us did get that briefing. We ought to remember that because this is an open hearing, we should, I think, find a way to ask the tough questions without creating a circular firing squad, and to whatever extent we can resist the urge to point fingers on both sides of the aisle. When I got to the Congress years ago for the first time in the 1980s, there was an unspoken rule that all politics stopped at the water's edge, that there had to be some sense of unity among ourselves, otherwise people would not assume that we were a unified nation in many, many respects. So I'm gonna just not stop, but I do have a quick question for any of you or all of you. I'm I heard something earlier, and by the way, Ambassador McFall, thanks for talking about Putin's goals, Biden's response, and long-term containment. I'm sorry we haven't had enough of an opportunity today to deal with that. Maybe we will before we wrap up. But I also heard from General Hodges clearly that we have got to find some sort of way to not always be on our heels with Russia and with Putin, and that looking past this, once we do get past it, hopefully, there's got to be some offensive postures or some offensive positions or offensive steps that we ought to start putting in place, because as sure as we're all here, Vladimir Putin is not going away, and whatever he's up to, he will be up to continually. So if someone can talk about any of that in the time that is remaining, I'm like Representative Johnson when he said, if I have any time left at all, I may not. But those are my thoughts. And if somebody could take a quick stab at any of that, that would be great.
Do we have time, Chairman? Oh, Chairman, you're on mute.
Ms. Kendall Taylor, I know we're going over here a second, but we have not heard from you. And I think this is something that you could speak to directly. So could you briefly respond to the gentleman's question?
I think it's such an important point that Lieutenant General Hodges talked about going on the offensive. And there are, I think, a lot of currently underutilized domains in our relationship with Russia where we could take more proactive steps. The Biden administration has begun some of those, but the focus on anti-corruption, for example, making that a national security priority. There are certainly parts of resilience to that, but I think we could be a lot more creative and proactive in terms of using sanctions to go on the offensive, to bust up corrupt networks, using sanctions to go after the cronies around Putin as well as their families. There are things that we could do to support investigative journalism. You know, there have been, we've talked about the rising repression inside of Russia. There are a tremendous amount of Russian civil society actors who are being forced to flee the country. There are ways the United States could take a lot more proactive steps to enable those people to continue to do their business, continue to shine a light on corruption inside Russia. So I think there are a number of ways, you know, we can, I don't want to go on too long here, but we can pick up on this because I think your point about a kind of a Cold War mentality where we need persistent pressure across all domains of our relationship with Russia in order to kind of disrupt the Kremlin's destabilizing actions and to constrain their ability to disrupt internationally is the mindset we need to return to. And like I said, I do think that there's a number of different domains where we could take a lot more engaged and proactive posture.